go ahead and get started. If you haven't answered our icebreaker yet, please go ahead and put in your chat box what you hope to learn from today's webinar, or if you have any questions on retainage. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I know it's been a crazy time, and we really do appreciate you joining us right after the holiday weekend. Today, we're going to talk about retainage in the construction industry. And as Thea says, oh, it's retainage, the stain on your AR. It should be a great one. My name is Lori, and I am the Payment Professionals Community Manager here at LevelSet. If you don't know what LevelSet does, we basically handle the compliance for construction, dealing with liens, waivers, any payment issues. We now have a community that provides education like the webinar that you're watching today. We do articles, events, recognition for credit managers. We also have contractor profiles, new risk reports, fintech, which is the financing side, lots of information. So if you'd like to find out more, please go to levelset.com. And today we are joined by Thea Dudley and Matt Viator. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I will let Thea, if you want to introduce yourself, and Matt, you can as well, and then go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you, Lori, and thanks everyone for spending some time with us this afternoon. I am Thea Dudley. I have spent 35 years in the construction LBM industry as a credit manager, leading credit teams to greatness. Sometimes we didn't feel very great, but retention is one of those things that when it comes up, it's like, retention, don't even bother. But we are going to turn that all around. And at that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt and let him introduce himself, although I think he's wonderful and I love the guide that you wrote.
I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm Matt Viator. I'm on LevelSet's legal team, and so far my career has been committed to helping construction businesses speed up their payment recovery timelines. Typically, that's through lien rights management, at least from our end. And but we've also been focusing on things like prompt payment laws, retainage laws, and just overall strategies for speeding up that payment timeline.
And I'm going to jump back in really quick, Thea. I wanted to mention to everybody how we came up with this topic. I was so excited. It had to be before Christmas. It might have even been before Thanksgiving last year. Thea and I were talking about her book that she wrote, which we'll talk about more at the end of the webinar. But we were talking about different subjects that were in it, and retention and retainage came up. And she just jumped out, oh my gosh, I read this article by Matt. We got to do it with Matt. I would love to interview him and go back and forth. So we finally got it on the calendar, and that's what you get to watch today.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know everybody's I saw a bunch of questions or ideas they want to kind of draw from topics coming in. So this is kind of what we're going to cover. And Matt, I'm going to start with who started this and why. And it's not very fun. Just to kind of look at some what I consider an archaic idea that just stuck. It's a pet peeve of mine. So.
Yeah.
Lori, you didn't turn over, just, hit the button because
Yep, next slide.
Next slide, please.
Yeah, so I was going to say that, archaic's the right word. At least as far as we've been able to track it back, retainage really started to take hold in the 1840s. It's in Great Britain. They're building the railroad, and essentially there were a lot more tradespeople coming into the industry, which led to and obviously anytime that it's a hot market, you have a lot of businesses competing for that business, and some of these people didn't necessarily have the best qualifications, didn't necessarily have the best workmanship, and on top of that, some of them, they were jumping onto different jobs, right? And there needed to be an incentive for one, to make sure that all the work being done was done in a workmanlike manner, and two, to make sure that everybody was seeing things out to the end of the job. So it's a pretty logical, academically and logically, it makes sense why retainage, the concept, why it exists, right? You're withholding some portion of what's owed, saving that to the end to make sure that everything's done right and that everything, gets completed. Obviously, we wouldn't be having this webinar if it worked out like the way that it's supposed to. And so it's one of those things, kind of like how some mechanics lien rights or mechanics lien laws are a bit arcane. It's one of those ideas that stuck through the test of time without as much revision as it probably needed. And it's one of those things that, it's always been done this way. So we're going to continue to do it that way. And unfortunately, that's how we got to where we are today.
So Lori, hit that slide, please. Okay, so fast forward 182 years, and like Matt said, now it's baked into our DNA, and some of us feel like we're stuck with it. And when I go into companies and we look at their AR and we talk about what's out there, I come up to something that is 240 days old or 500 and some odd days old. And it's like, hey, what is this? Oh, it's retention. Like that just explains it away. So Lori, slide us. So that comes up with the two questions that I always have to ask is how much and how long? And that's where it starts to get sticky. And it kind of goes off the rails because how much are they holding and for how long? And those those two topics are probably going to take up most of our time. So, yes, I'd love to say that everything is spelled out clearly, but Matt, I'm sure you agree, it really starts in the initial contract.
Absolutely.
Yes, there are some laws out there, but you got to start defining that in the contract. Do you want to expound on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. And to do a very quick overview of the how much and how long, how much it's very typically 5 to 10%. How long? Usually it's some specified amount of time after substantial completion. Typically, GCs want to pay out retainage after they receive retainage themselves, which for obvious reasons that could be much later than certain specialty trades or suppliers have finished their participation in the project. In terms of how the legal systems work surrounding retainage, much like lien laws, it is different in every state. It's also, it can be different for public versus private projects within the same state. So it's another one of those legal systems or, systems of law where you really have to focus in on exactly where the work is being done. As far as how those laws typically work, generally they'll put a cap on the amount of retainage that can be withheld for these certain project types, and they will dictate when exactly that retainage must be released. And they'll set up different triggers. Some of the better retainage law systems will even phase out retainage throughout the lifetime of the job. Say if you finish a certain percentage of the job, you're supposed to be paid a certain percentage of the retainage that's been withheld to date. But again, I think Thea would agree strongly with this. What the law says or what you think should happen based on the laws versus reality, there can be a huge gap, and there a lot of times there is.
Okay, so the reality I live in, and I'm not sure what everybody on the webinar's experience is that you get that contract and it's a little squishy. And when it comes to, first of all, when it comes to payment dates, and then when it comes to that retainage piece. And typically what I see is everyone just goes with, oh, it's 10%. If there's a bunch of misnomers out there that it's 10% and it's to, the end of time and we don't ever touch it. And those are, I think your biggest benefit that you can help with yourself is to be able to be educated on it and to push back and challenge. Because most generals and most subs don't know the laws in their state. They don't know where to go to look, or they get bad information, or worse yet, they're just like, it's retainage, and they just kind of throw their hands up. Mm-hmm. So Lori, slide us.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I meant to send this earlier, so I'm gonna do it now. I'm about to post in the chat Level Set's kind of retainage homepage. If you scroll down to the middle of that page, you'll find a breakdown, you'll find a map where you can click a specific state and re-up.
Now this just tells me that you did not pay attention to your homework, because this map is on here.
Oh, I saw the map, but they can use this one and click. They can click through this.
You can't click on our WebEx, but you can click on the map. But so that absolutely. that does, I want to back up where Matt wrote this really amazing comprehensive guide to retainage. And that's, like Lori said, how we got started. Was I recommend it to a lot of people, because even though I can go and tell you, look, here's little bits and pieces for your state, or here's how I would negotiate it, or here are some tools to help you use. I like to be, I'm a find it myself kind of person. So I want to go out there and look at it and be able to click on the links within it to take me down a rabbit hole for stuff that's pertinent to what I'm trying to find. So that really has helped me quite a bit. And again, if you haven't had a chance, when you're done with, don't do it while we're talking now, but when you get a chance, go out there and you can grab that. But there's a couple of different areas I want to talk about. First, let's talk about government, because that's a little bit different, just like with lien law. So there's federal, and then there's also, you know, some county and state and municipal portions of it. So Matt, why don't you go ahead and fill us in a little bit on federal?
Absolutely. So the Federal Acquisition Act, it's been passed. Everyone knows it as the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or FAR. That dictates, you know, how retainage can be used on federal jobs. And so between the project owner, you know, the public entity that's in charge of the job, and their contractor, the prime contractor, there's actually, there's not a set percentage that is withheld on every job. However, the party letting that contract, they are able to kind of dictate when withholding is going to happen on the job based on, you know, what's going on with the job. So if they have reason to have concern about, oh, the project might be going past schedule, or might be going over budget, or if they have some other concern on the job, they have the leeway to dictate that, okay, retainage will be withheld from this prime contractor. Anyone that's ever worked on any construction job knows that there's always going to be something that goes wrong, something that looks wonky. You know, the budget and the schedule tend to be more flexible than in other industries. So it really gives them a lot of opportunity to kind of wield that power to dictate. So yeah, so they have a lot of flexibility there. Now that prime contractor is entitled to withhold retainage from their subs and down the line. And so on federal jobs, it would not be uncommon at all for there to be withholding. That being said, generally the prime contractor is not able to bill amounts that are going to be retained from their subs invoices, right? So while they may say, okay, we are going to withhold 5% from each of these payouts, they're not able to just to bill the government for that money and then hold on to that money. Instead, what they must do is, okay, then we're requesting 95% payout of this invoice. And then towards the end of the project, there will be that lump sum that's later billed and added. For state jobs, there's a lot more guidance. I sent that link earlier to the state breakdown, and there's a map later on, like Thea mentioned. But each state generally dictates how much retainage can be withheld. Very typically, that's a cap, either, you know, somewhere like to 5 to 10%. Sometimes it's discussed as a reasonable amount, which will generally be 5 to 10%. And then you even have a state. So state jobs, county jobs, municipal jobs, they typically all follow the same framework whereby retention is allowed but maybe capped.
So federal, I think, is capped at 5, and then it kind of goes from there. But I really loathe when states do that thing where it's, hey, I'm going to allow you to be reasonable, or what I think is reasonable versus somebody else. It's never reasonable when you're messing with my money.
100%.
You know, we did the work. We allowed the materials to go out. We had our crews go out there, whatever it was. I don't like squishy. So in any of those, I'm a big fan of, if you give me a piece of paper and it has to do with the rules of the road, I'm going to mark it up if I don't understand it, or I can cut a better deal. So yeah. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Lori, hit that slide, girl. So let's talk private and commercial, where most of us play. You know, federal has a little bit more structure to it. You know, private is really like the Wild West. It reminds me a lot of liens, where every state's a little different. Some have better laws, some don't have any. I think I was just looking at Virginia the other day, and it's basically, it's just a free state. Do whatever you want. And you really have to pay attention to what's in that contract and what you're allowing.
Yep. Yeah. So on private jobs, typically that's where we see the most retention withheld, because it is generally the least regulated. But even still, it's typically 5 to 10%. You'll have random states like a New Mexico where withholding is actually not allowed. You'll have states like Texas where withholding is required. But very typically it's the 5 to 10% range as well. But we're talking about here, there's some states where it's a reasonable amount. What's reasonable to you may not be reasonable to me, especially if I'm having to wait for you to pay me what I've already earned. But very typically it will fall in that 5 to 10% range. And I would like to add as well that in all these, in virtually all of these states and all these scenarios where the retainage there is some retainage law on the books that caps retainage, that doesn't mean that you're automatically entitled to withhold that percentage no matter what. What it means is that your contract can have retainage in it, but it can only be up to that 5% cap or that 10% cap or that reasonable amount cap. And so if the contract is totally silent on retainage, then retainage generally shouldn't be withheld. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that your customer will see it that way, but having the law on your side can be pretty helpful.
It can, but don't get me started on that.
Lori, oh yeah. I was talking to someone just today about you being right isn't enough. Being beyond reproach is what's necessary a lot of the time.
Yeah, and then you got to get them in front of the judge, and you got to get that there. Lori, can you slide us? Okay, so here's the map that Matt was talking about. And so one of the big challenges is, again, it all starts with your contract. So when you see where it's retainage, spell out exactly what the amount is, and then know what it is in your state. So, the unregulated states are the ones that are a little, I keep using the word squishy. It's more like free for all, and you'll see different triggers in there. So for me, when we're done, whatever entity I'm working with, whether it's insulation, roofing, drywall, landscape carpeting, whatever you are that you're being held retainage on, as you're kind of going into that and you're looking at, all right, here's where I finished my project. I want to look at the wording in that contract where it says retainage will be held until the project is complete. Well, the project for me is complete. So now we start arguing about the verbiage on it. So I like to have that really locked down where it says when I am complete past, 120 days, because you're going to know what's wrong with it from what I would have caused a problem on. I don't want to be responsible for every other trade on the job site. I don't want to be responsible for other dealers. I don't want to have that kind of responsibility. So I want to make sure that it's spelled out. And yes, I've been called some not very nice names for being so picky and finite about it. But if you don't lay that out, you end up holding it for 549 days. So Matt, if you had to give people when you say reasonable amount, I know what's reasonable in my book, and that's here's X number of days when I'm finished, you're going to release 5%, or when we're at this point, and then, total end of the project, honey, I'm way gone by then. I'm not waiting on that. And then do they allow interest? Or are we going to, what are some things that we can put in there? So Lori, hit that slide, girl. Oh, and yes, New Mexico is my favorite state, not just for the food, but because they don't allow retainage. Come on, you gotta love a state that says, no, you can't keep my money for free. If you have an issue, come at me, bro. So I definitely like that.
I love it.
So what is a subcontractor to do in that? And again, we started talking about the contract. So, I pulled out some of my favorite things from the retention guide. I wondered if there are some things you can kind of expand on with this approach, like how most people aren't comfortable cutting up somebody's contract.
Right.
I don't have an issue with it, but you also have to be able to back it up with, here's what this looks like, here's why I'm calling this out, and here's my logic behind it.
Absolutely. So the very first thing I'll say, which I think it's fair, is that it's more important than the actual percentage of retainage is the process by which you will be able to you'll be able to prove that it's due, right? So you'll say, maybe that the contract will say that, upon completion and review and inspection, maybe you'll call for them to specifically go in and look at your work and approve it. And maybe, it will require that specific punch work or, specific fixes will be done in a timely manner in order to make sure that, all the work's been done satisfactorily, all the work's been approved, and that without a doubt, the retainage is owed. And so Thea talks about squishy contracts. We want that to be laid out. We want each line to be really explicit about, okay, what are the steps that I can actually, actively take to recover my retainage. And, it's not that uncommon to have the conversation beforehand about, what's going to be required, but you want it to be there in the contract. That way later on, whenever it's, I'm not sure if we can release it yet. We have this going on. We have that going on. This other work. No, this is in my contract. These are the things that I need to achieve. I've done these things. I need to be paid my retainage. But yeah, so definitely talking about retainage at the very start of the job or before you've even got the contract signed, hopefully, is the best way of going about it. The longer the project goes on, the more awkward that retainage conversation is going to be. And so if you're already having that withheld from your checks, or if you're at the end of the project wondering where's my retainage payment, it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. So if you can have that towards the beginning of the job, before the job is even before you've even signed the contract, that's ideal. You want to make sure that contract's not squishy. It has items laid out that you can do to be paid what you're owed. And you obviously want to make sure that it's in line with your state law. There's resources online, including level sets, where it can be pretty quick and easy to determine, okay, here are the limits on what can be withheld. If this contract isn't in line with it, I'm not going to sign the contract. That's not legal. That's, the law exists for a reason. It's there to protect me. It's there to protect you. It's there to lay out to some degree what's fair. And so you're going to want to make sure that your contract is in line with those statutory caps. Nailing down the details of how to be held, escrow, earning interest. That's obviously going to be one of those items that's going to be, in reality, is probably going to be less negotiable. Contractors aren't going to want to, put that into an account that's earning interest. But maybe that's one of the things you use to negotiate a quicker retainage release, or maybe it's something that you use to negotiate. Okay, well, if I'm not going to be earning interest on this, I need to know how to get it. So give me these detailed line items that I can do. If you can get them to put the payment in escrow, great. That means, that way, the money's there. They're not, performing some accounting tricks to pay other bills with your money while you're still waiting on it. That would be awesome if you can get an escrow. It'd be great if you can get it earning interest. But in reality, it's going to be one of those things that your customer is going to be very reluctant to do. I think you'd agree, Thea. I see you nodding.
Well, I do, but it's like you said, if I don't ask, I don't get. And if
Absolutely.
I put lots of options out there and it's, hey, how is this? Is it going to be earning interest? And they're coming back with, well, no, it's not. It's like, okay, so you're holding my money you want me to hold it till the end of the project. You anticipate this project is going to go for how long? 18 months. I'm, the drywall. So I'm early in on this project. So tell me, at what are the trigger points? So I should be out of this by here. So, if that's not the case and we're going, the full Monty on this one, then, where's my interest on this? Because, I want some assurance that you're going to be solid when we're done here. And yeah, it is an uncomfortable conversation, because typically what happens is the GC bows up and says, well, you're just a sub. It's like, you weren't too proud to ask me for 30 grand, or 120 grand or whatever this contract is. So yeah, I think it's how you frame it and how you go about it. And as you look at people and tell them, look, here's what I'm willing to negotiate. I really want to work with you on this, but this seems unreasonable, because most of the time your profit as a subcontractor, and, also as a dealer there, I can't forget about our dealers that would get in this situation where they're held with retention as well. But that's where most of your profit ends up. I don't want to be, we're not married. I don't want to carry you for the next, 5 years because you couldn't figure out how to bring this project to a close, or I've allowed you to pick my pocket to cover somebody else's mistakes on this. I'm willing to pay for what I've done.
Mhm.
And if my guys, muck it up, we'll work it out. But I'm not indemnifying the entire thing.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'll add that as part of negotiating a lower percentage or shortened timeframes, like Dave was mentioning earlier, especially if you're one of the specialty trades that's doing work, towards the beginning of the project, or if you're supplying materials that are going to be delivered and installed towards the beginning of the project, you want to do your best to negotiate retainage terms that recognize that say, okay, after X days of my completion of my work on the project, that's when my retainage will be paid to me. And if they're uncomfortable with that, say, okay, then let's inspect the work, or we'll get somebody out here to come look at this to make sure that everything was up to snuff. But this time frame is just not going to work for me if it's indeterminate.
Well, and then Lori, if you'll hit the slide, please. The other part is a lot of credit managers are uncomfortable calling for retainage because they're like, well, I don't really know what's in the contract. That's in another area of our company, or, I read it, but it just says completion of the project's still going. It's like, when did we put the roof on? Nobody could do anything until the roof was on, we were the framers. So, we did the trusses. We were very early on. So now I'm, 167 days into this, and that's just, again, not going to you're letting it just hang out there. You've got to reel that in. So I think one of the biggest challenges is getting people to change that mindset, where they do call, and they do call more often. It's like, hey, give me your ETA, what's going on? So, you keep asking, you'd be surprised. A lot of contractors, and this shouldn't surprise anyone, but a lot of contractors don't release that money till you squawk, even if there's a trigger in there that they're supposed to release it on a certain time. And I'm not trying to paint GCs in a bad light, or prime contractors, but it's just, as we've talked about, it's just baked into the DNA. Unfortunately, stereotypes exist for a reason, and this one exists because it's happened.
100%.
Nope, back up, Lori. There you go. So, again, we're kind of talking through, the actual collection piece of it, and timeframes are a huge thing. Even if you're in the middle of some contracts and you didn't bake those in, you can definitely go back in and start calling and saying, okay, what does this look like? When you say end of the contract, I'm sorry, we're interpreting this contract different, because end of my contract was, 3 months ago. Has there been any problem with my work? The building hasn't fallen down. It's structurally sound. So my framing was fine. So what's the holdup here? How can we get this out? Well, how about you held 10%, how about releasing 5%? And, start pushing it that way. Never be afraid to ask for your money. You're not begging, it's yours. And then get the name of who you're dealing with. And, when we talked about signing stuff, don't doing any work before the contract, as you're kind of going through, it's, well, the guy out here on the job, and, Fred Smith is the field supervisor. It's like, honey, he may be gone. I don't want, Fred's great, I'm sure, but I need someone who can ink this deal. And I also need, somebody in the office who I'm going to be able to go back to. So, getting lots of contact information with who you can hold accountable. And then, you have to stay educated on when the retainage percentages drop, because in a lot of states, there are triggers for those. And then my favorite is the lien question. And that's a big one, Matt. So I wanted to spend some time on that as well, where it always becomes a question of, well, can I file a lien because they're holding retention and technically the money's not due, but I'm going to lose lien rights, but the money's not due.
Yep.
It's like, no, pull the trigger, lean it.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm going to let you go to town on this one.
I mean, I think that's if I had to distill it down, I would have. That's a good way of describing it. But so it can be really uncomfortable because retainage laws are over here, lien laws are over here. They don't really communicate all that well. They don't really tie into each other all that well. So your timelines, your legal timelines for retainage and your retainage amounts, mechanics lien law doesn't really take that into account most of the time. And so that lien deadline is the lien deadline, regardless of what anybody's telling you, regardless of what retainage is being withheld on the project. Mechanics lien rights exist because work or materials were provided to the property that improved the property and they haven't been paid for. Retainage, it represents an amount owed for work that has been done, that hasn't been paid. It's being withheld for a reason, but it's still true that it has been done and it has been paid for. So retainage amounts, even if they're being withheld, based off of, the contract or based off of, whatever, the lien deadline is the lien deadline. And so you can't wait on promises. You can't listen to, oh, the check's in the mail, or you can't listen to, no, really, just wait one more week. I can't jeopardize my mechanics lien rights. They are, I'm certainly biased, but mechanics lien rights tend to be the most powerful tool you have to force payment in the construction industry. They're even more powerful than waiving your contract, because guess what? If you want to enforce that contract, you're going to have to go to court, small claims court, whatever it may be. Mechanics liens provide an option where you can get paid what you're owed without having to go through lawyers, without having to go through the courts, without having to pay a ton of money to, just recover what you've already been paid. Filing mechanics liens is pretty quick and easy. And so if you're going to throw out the quick, easy tool that makes everybody else really nervous on the project, why wouldn't you want that in your tool belt for recovery? And not to mention, once mechanics lien talk even comes into play, whether that's a notice of intent to lien or threats to file a lien, if you're sending those out to parties that are beyond just your customer, right? Beyond just that one rung up the payment ladder, if the owner now knows, wait, someone's not been paid, there might be a lien filed. If the lender knows that, whoever, if other parties on the project realize, okay, this person is that they're going to have to file this lien if they aren't paid what they're owed, they may speed up those payment timelines, and they'd be smart to do so. So I agree strongly. You do not want to lose your mechanics lien rights, especially in a situation where it's just, just wait one more week, or, the check's coming.
So that brings us to another question. Lori, hit that slide button, please. It's unfortunate that I you poor thing. So here's one question that always comes up, and it's like, okay, all that's owed on the project is the retention, and I'm coming up on my lien rights. What do I do? Is it the same go-to move? Do I go ahead and lien it? And they're like, well, but you agreed in the contract and they're technically not due. It's like, yeah, I know, but my retention's like $18,000, and getting paid by you was kind of a bit of a hard sell. So, where do you fall on that as an attorney?
So I'm an attorney, and I think most people would agree that attorneys tend to be a little bit cold on these kinds of decisions.
So lien them is what I'm going to hear you say.
So yeah, if it were my client, and if they were in a bond and they really didn't believe that they were going to be paid, and if that lien deadline was coming up, the odds are pretty good that I would advise them to, lien the project, keep that tool intact. You can always talk to them after the lien's been filed, or in anticipation of the lien, tell them, I'm going to have to do this. Can we please work this out? I don't want to file a lien and screw up your whole project. You don't want me to file a lien. Let's figure this out. But yeah, obviously every situation is different. And like maybe you do have those certain relationships and those certain customers that you really truly believe in, and that you've built that relationship over years. But if there's any doubt that you're not going to be able to bring that payment in, this is a business, and you're in it to make money, and you're owed what you're owed. And so a mechanics lien is the best tool to make sure that you're paid. The right exists for a reason, and so don't be afraid to use it. But obviously, you want to be responsible, you want to be respectful to a degree, and that kind of goes back to the conversation aspect of, you can talk, you can at least try to talk some of these things out before blindly filing a lien without mentioning that you're about to do that, or at least sending a notice of intent or whatever it may be. That that can ruffle some feathers. But if they know a lien's going to be filed if you don't do this thing. They know that you're up against a deadline. How can they fault you for it? They will fault you for it, but it's yeah.
Well, so it really comes up, some of this comes down to your business relationship. So as you're as you're going through this, you're picking and choosing. I know I sound like I'm a quick trigger, let's lean into everybody. And, the minute we go, within 5 days of me losing my lien rights, everybody's getting slapped. But you do have to pick and choose on some of those, especially with the retention piece. Again, it goes back to, what did I agree to? What's my communication like? So it still has that element of relationship, although it can't just totally be everything on relationship. It's got to be that combination. So starting with that contract, how you're working it out, what you're putting in there, what your trigger points are, what you're able to pull on. So, those are, in looking at the guide, those were the big things that I pulled out of them, was, making sure that I've spelled everything out in advance.
Yeah. And to that point, one of the things that we've always recommended from day one is that, your credit policy should talk about liens and retainage. You should have these, you should have your playbook way before it comes time to make the decision. You should have your written down rules of, okay, if this happens, then I will respond this way. If retainage is being withheld and my lien deadline's coming up, this is what I'll do. Once you have those written out rules, you can decide whether to follow them or to break them, but at least you have that policy already written out, so you're not necessarily making emotional decisions, and you can come into it with a cool head. And obviously all these situations are different. None of this is legal advice, but there are general guidelines to follow.
Lori, please hit that slide button. So there's the websites to be able to go and grab some of the retainage and some of the blog, and there's a lot of questions in there as well. Lori, I know I haven't been able to read the chat because, frankly, I'm not that talented where I can do multi screens that way, but were there some questions that people had specifically for Matt?
For both of you, and absolutely, that's why I'm here to help. Right, the newest question is, if you file a lien and cancel that lien, can you refile the lien at a later date?
I saw that one, and I was hoping to address that one. And so one of the main things to think about before you even get into the ultimate answer is that whenever you're releasing a mechanics lien, the language on that lien release will very much dictate what your rights would be going forward, right? So if your lien release says, I have been paid for this work, I no longer need a lien, and you release it that way, well, to go back and file a lien later, that might not be available to you. If the lien says, it's being released for other reasons, or if it doesn't specify, maybe you'd be more successful. Unfortunately, this is one of those things. Lien law, just like retainage, it's dictated separately state by state. I can say with confidence that there are definitely situations in states where that's possible to file a mechanics lien, release the lien, refile the lien. It's possible. In some states, in some situations, but I can't give a blanket yes or no, because in other situations, it might not be possible. But I will tie in one thing I repeat all the time is that releasing your mechanics lien rights, releasing your mechanics lien claim after you've already had to file the lien, you always want to think 3 times about that. Not even just twice, 3 times before you do that, because that's a powerful tool. You have to keep in mind the deadlines. Sometimes these are short time frames, so maybe there won't even be time to refile that lien. Some people want to release the lien after partial payment as a sign of good faith. We generally say, if you haven't been paid in full for what you're owed, I would be very reluctant to release a lien. And so that might get to you before the point of releasing the lien and then refiling it. Maybe you don't even release it if you're still owed money.
So just to clarify, so I'm understanding this, it's been a while since I've done the credit side, but you can't refile unless you're still within your lien rights, right?
So I'll say that it's not necessarily black or white that you would be able to refile, but if your deadline is passed, you almost definitely won't be able to refile.
See, and I got something totally different out of that, Lori. For me, it's like marriage and divorce. You can't go, we're married, we're divorced, we're married, we're divorced. You want to look at, what does that say? What does that lien release say? What did I agree to? Did I just make a blanket, yes, I've been paid? And yet there's there's an opportunity for me to go back in there. So until that cold hard cash is in my hand or that payment has cleared the bank, I'm not willing to release anything. They're expensive to file. They're time consuming, and I don't want to ever just make it a quick fix. So I mean, I get where there's times you're stuck in that situation. It's just I never want to release it unless I've got it all collected.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We do have a question from Claire. It says, Thea, you said the word indemnify. What is that?
Oh, that's my most hated thing in a contract or a credit application. And so Matt, you probably have a very different legal definition than I do of indemnification. I want to be, that's where the owner or the GC or bank or whoever is creating the contractual obligation is coming to you and saying, hey, you're going to be responsible for all of these things. And if there's a problem, we're going to share it across, we're going to share the wealth and the bounty. It's like, no. I don't care if somebody backed over your porta potty, ran over your dog, whatever it is. I'm only responsible for my little slice of the universe. And I don't want to be pulled into everyone else's drama. Is that, Matt, you probably have a much better way to describe it, but I mean, that's the credit manager version of indemnification.
Whenever you've agreed to indemnify someone, that means that you've agreed to take on obligations and take on the responsibility to pay for certain things. The scope of that indemnification, you can limit it to specifically only things that you're working on. Typically, it would be limited to just things that you have in your control. But when given the option on whether or not to indemnify someone for something, usually less responsibility on my business is something that I'm interested in.
I start out crossing the entire thing off, and then someone comes back and goes, well, you can't do that. It's like, well, then I am willing to indemnify what my company is responsible for. Again, I don't want to be responsible for, everybody else that did something. This is my little slice, whether it's roofing, insulation, drywall, framing, whatever. This is just what I'm doing. So no.
Thank you. We got a question from Darnell. Can the contractor hold retainage through the warranty period of a year or more? Seeing that trend in this environment.
Generally, they'll want to and they'll try to, but typically no. So for one, that the lien deadline will be way before that, and so I would say that the lien deadline would dictate how I'm approaching recovering my retainage in a lot of ways. So one, I would never accept those terms. But then again, I'm not working in the same reality that some of you are.
No, I'm working in that reality, Matt, and I'm going to tell you that seems really excessive and kind of egregious. Where it's just that's overreaching. And whose warranty are they talking about? Are they talking about my company's warranty for a workmanship warranty for like a year, or are they clawing back to the manufacturer's warranty? And is it a 5-year warranty? It's like that seems excessive and strike.
And I'll add this is that the point of the warranty is that you're providing the warranty. You will come back. You'll come back and fix it. So they want to, it sounds like they want to double dip. They want to not pay you for it and call you back for it. No. The contract says, this is under warranty. So I'll come back and fix it if there's an issue. That doesn't mean that you necessarily just get to withhold it indefinitely and they hope you forget about it.
But that's a good way for that person to go back and say, look, I see what you've done here, but now you have a little bit of an argument to go back with, where it's like, that's what the warranty's for. It doesn't make sense. You can throw out the double dipping, and that at least gives you a good way to negotiate it out of there with using some logic and the resources behind you.
Yeah.
You're muted, Lori.
Thank you. I keep trying to stop it from my dog barking. I apologize. Would it make sense for the GC to issue a bond? I guess bond around the retainage?
So retainage bonds exist. And some people, would say that if there's a bond in place, why is retainage being withheld? I would say that, like a payment bond or a performance bond isn't necessarily a one-to-one replacement for retainage, but on the end of the retainage bonds, they're not very common, but there are states where you're entitled to be paid your full retainage if you provide a bond to your customer that, under the terms of that bond, if there was some issue for which they would normally pull from the retainage to cover that issue, they would instead be paid out from the bond, and then you would have to pay that surety back. That's not very common at all. It makes a lot of sense why it's not common, because you don't want to pay a bond premium just to be paid what you're already owed. It's a lot of work for a benefit that you should already be receiving. So retainage bonds aren't that common, but performance bonds or payment bonds aren't necessarily a one-to-one replacement with retainage.
But it's worth a shot, though, to go back and, if something happens and the prime contractor or the GC, hits a snag, maybe maybe they're just gone. You can go after that payment bond and take a run at that.
Absolutely.
So Lori, would you forward the slide, please?
Absolutely.
Since that wasn't the slide I thought it was, but okay. So what other questions do we have, Lori, or are we?
We have more.
Okay.
Doug wanted to add on to the bond sort of thing. So what do you suggest to a sub who liens a project, the developer or owner bonds around that lien, and then they default on the retention?
So, go ahead, Thea.
No. Go ahead, Matt. I mean, logically, I'd be like, why don't I just, that's what the bond is for. Why wouldn't I just attach the bond?
Yeah, that's first thing comes to mind as well. So again, not legal advice, but generally speaking, when a lien is bonded off, the claim doesn't disappear, and a lot of GCs like to act that it does, but no, the recovery process continues. So generally, the claim is then made against that bond, which has been substituted for the lien. And so, if your lien has been bonded off, and if those amounts are still outstanding, you're generally entitled to make a claim against the bond, which has been substituted for the lien. So that process is just like a normal recovery on bond process. Typically, that requires you notify the bond company that there's a claim. You give your reasons why. They'll probably come back to you with some questions so they can begin their investigation. Where they'll say, okay, we want some receipts. We want proof that you were on the job that for these dates. We want proof that this and that and this and that. You provide that to them. They do their investigation, and then they either approve or deny. But even if they do deny that claim, just like how if you file a claim on a payment bond for non-payment, you can later enforce that claim if it's not paid out. You can file a lawsuit against the bond. You can do that as well if the lien's been bonded off.
Thank you. Just from our icebreaker that we had in the beginning, there's several people that were wanting to know verbiage for either how to avoid somebody withholding retainage, how to negotiate the retainage, and how to collect on the retainage. Just do you have any verbiage that you think is good to use just kind of across the board?
I think Thea will have more practical experience here in negotiating.
If I first start out, just, when it's retention, it depends on who you're working with, what you're trying to affect. If you want to cross it out, if you want to call them back, call whoever, put the contract in front of you and say, listen, this 10% with no triggers, it seems a bit murky. Here's what I'm proposing, and you write everything out, or you can change it out. So when you're talking about the verbiage, you just basically cross it out like you would any other contract, and put in there 5% trigger due and payable by X date, 60 days after my portion of the work is done. It's actually just like you were talking to somebody. If you can talk it out, write it down, and then finesse it down to a much smoother version than what just happened here on the fly. But here's what I'm asking for. I'm reducing it to 5%, and then it's going to go to 2.5% after 60 days, 90 days, whatever the trigger is that I'm completed. So you can see that my work is good, everything is fine. and then, release the other 2.5%, at, 30 days beyond that. But put in there very specific triggers. They're going to come back and tell you, well, I can't do this. Well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to hold it till the entire end of the project. It's like, well, what is the end of the project for you? And then you get that conversation going. It's like, okay, so does it sound reasonable for me to wait for, 529 days because your project's not going to be done till then, and you're going to be holding 10% of my money for, till the end of time. So
Yep.
once you start that dialogue and just putting that information out there, it's getting those what you want to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and anytime you're able to add proposed language, it makes it easier to get to a yes, right? If they can simply say, okay, I can agree to that, or okay, let's tweak this a little bit, it's a lot easier to get to yes than just saying, I don't like the retainage thing, let's scratch it out.
So the other
what you think is reasonable. Sorry, Lori.
No, you're good. You're good. And so the other most common one, they're saying, what is a realistic time frame to collect retainage, and how long after, say they are waiting till the completion of the project in full, how long until they have to pay you out for that?
When you say how long do they, well, I guess a lot of it's your state and a lot of it's what your contract is. So, I always default to that. If you look at contracts or credit applications as rules of rules of engagement, your contract is that rule of engagement. What did it say? What did I agree to? If you just left it open-ended where we're holding 10%, it's like, okay, that told me nothing. There's just nothing there. It doesn't tell me. I'm assuming it's the end of the project. But what did my state say? And I like to have it all buttoned down in there. I want to go ahead and ask those hard questions. And as a credit manager, we talk about money all the time. So it's not that far-fetched. It just is one of those conversations that hasn't been pushed. So just like signing someone's credit app or getting someone to sign a contract, you have to go in there and push, let's talk about this retention piece and what it looks like. And I go for 60 days after my portion of completion. I start with what I want. I didn't say I'm going to get it, but here's what I want. I want 60 days after my guys have left the job. And then what's my next trigger? I'd like, a percentage of that. And then, I'll let you hold it for another 30 days, depending on, is there triggers that I need to help satisfy them on? What are they trying to do? I've had the argument used, well, Thea, we have to be fair to all trades. No, you don't. I don't work for all those other trades. I work for this trade. And I asked, if they didn't ask and negotiate a better deal, it's just like what you're getting paid for a living. I don't care what a coworker makes. I care what I make. That's the deal I cut. So I look at it the same way that I look at those contracts. It's what deal did I cut? And if somebody else, they had the same opportunity that I did, if they chose not to, that's on them. So I go for a quick, I put 60 days and let's see what they do.
Yeah. And and so I think it's all excellent. As the backstop, you want to look to the lien deadline. You want to look to what the state law says about retainage deadlines, if anything. And so you want to say, you want to do all these things, and you want to have these deadlines in mind. Say, okay, these are my drop dead dates, and maybe in those phone calls, was it the squeaky wheel gets the grease?
Mm-hmm.
In those conversations when you're bringing it up, hey, where's my retainage? Hey, where's my retainage? You have to start sprinkling in, okay, I hear you. This is my deadline to do this. Neither of us want that. Let's figure it out.
I found that it works kind of the same as even just your regular collections. The more you annoy them, they're not going to want to hear from you anymore, so they're going to pay you.
We don't set out to annoy people, although that's how they take it. But it is true. But you're like, look, I got a boss too. I got to get an ETA on this money, and you just telling me, hey, we're not done yet. Well, what's the ETA on this? And again, what did I agree to? Are you guys releasing any early? I want more information. So, I got to go back and have something other than, oh, it's retainage. It's not, it's my profit that you're sitting on. And, yes, I've never been paid interest on retainage, although I think it's a brilliant strategy. Unfortunately, it kind of gets glossed over like it's a given. and it's not. And that's, I think, where we have to keep reframing the conversation.
Absolutely. I don't know if that's the end of our questions. I don't know if you have any more you want to add before I do your spiel on your book.
Matt, I'm good. How about you?
Yeah, I think we hit everything that, you know, I had written down that I really wanted to make sure that we touched on. Just, and like, obviously, and I don't think that, you know, this is a credit conversation, but you know, never feel
illegal, Matt.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. But what I was gonna say is that, like, never feel guilty about, you know, pushing for your retainage. Never feel, you know, it's money. It's money you've earned. It's money that you've earned for work done. You know, they've received the benefit already. And on top of that, you know, trades are already put in a cash crunch. Regardless of retainage, you're already floating, you know, materials at the beginning of the job, the mobilization costs, like, how many people are actually getting mobilization deposits. You know, it's you know, not the majority, right? And so you have that on the front end. And then, okay, when you do finally start getting paid, which, you know, it's not the 30, it's probably the 60 or the 90. Once you do start getting paid, you have that percentage that's being taken out every time. And so these systems are already pretty harsh on subcontractors and specialty trades. And so, you know, it's important to feel emboldened to, you know, to really go after what you're owed.
I will make two comments here. Diane added, she said when she's being called not so nice names because she won't release a lien without payment, she quotes, "I like you, but you owe me money."
You know, I love this woman.
And then I also want to give a shout out to Tracy. She's from Hawaii and she is brand new into construction. So this was a nice one to jump right into.
Welcome, Tracy. Welcome to the club. It's great.
For those that don't know already, Thea does offer a credit management academy course. She does lien waivers. She does notices, credit basics. I mean, there's tons of different courses in there. I think it's about 4 hours to go through all of them. And that's prior to
4 beautiful hours together, not all at once though.
And they are fun. And you're not going to be bored. You do get certified, just some great information there. And then she also wrote a book. It's the Guide to Credit and Collections. And like I mentioned in the beginning, this is where we came up with the topic for the retainage webinar. If you want to just check it out, you can go to levelset.com/Thea Dudley. It'll let you download the first 11 pages for free. And if it's something you're interested in, just shoot me an email and I'll see if I can get you a free copy on that.
Thank you, Lori.
One other thing we do with the community is recognize the credit managers that are out there. Anybody that's being a hero for their company that goes above and beyond. Even if you're on this call, have your coworker nominate you for actually sitting through a webinar on retainage. Great information.
Email me, I'll nominate you.
I mean, it's great information. It is a tough subject. So you just go to levelset.com. CMOM is Credit Manager of the Month. I want to thank you again, Matt and Thea, for your time on this. It was a lot of information, great information. If anybody wants to ask any additional questions under Matt, we do direct you to the community. It's just CMC for Credit Management Community. Otherwise, there's Thea's email there, and she'd be happy to jump on with you and answer some more questions.
And Matt, thank you so much for, again, letting me pick on you. I am a huge fan of this retainage guide. So if you guys get a chance, go check it out. I love that there are hyperlinks. So I can, again, go down any rabbit holes I want to and find out the information and continue to educate myself on some different subjects. It's always, retainage is always one of those that falls under lien waivers where there's so many questions, and sometimes somebody tells you something, you're like, well, that sounds, and you know it's not right, but they're like, well, they said it with such conviction, it kind of sounds like it might be possible. I gotta phone a friend. I gotta figure this out.
Yeah, no, and thank you guys for having me. I approach a lot of this from an academic and from the legal standpoint, and I love being able to be a part of the practical angle of it as well. And every time I do one of these with you guys, I learn something. So this is great.
Well, we do as well. I just let everyone know we will send out a copy of the recording tomorrow morning, as well as the link to Matt's article and more information on both Matt and Thea for you to peruse. Thank you for taking the time out of your day today to join us, and we hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.